introduction. I definitely didn't write the intro, so I definitely don't consider myself a visionary of any kind. But hopefully I can provide some insights around data to help you guys moving forwards. We're going to be talking about how you can align your marketing and business data to improve your ROI overall. And that's the topic that we'll be discussing. So let's get into it. Oops, the agenda has popped up again. So I work in a digital marketing agency. We deal with a lot of platforms, a lot of data sets. So something that we usually deal with on the left-hand side are the platforms, that we work on day to day. Our clients probably are looking at platforms on the right-hand side. All of these platforms generate a lot of data on a daily basis, and it's a lot to look at. So I think one thing that we all agree on internally is that we deal with a lot of data. There's a few side effects of having all these platforms and data sets to look at. And it causes a lot of disruptions and discrepancies when you're working on a particular client, for example. As a marketing analyst, we're an agency. We're used to looking at marketing data and advertising data on a daily basis. For us, a platform like Google Analytics, which tracks users on a website, is something that we look at on a daily basis. That's our platform that we look at and report performance on the back of to our clients and to anyone within Indago as well. But on the other side, for a client, for example, a business analyst on the client side might be looking at a completely different data set. They might be looking at some internal data product or a data platform that they have, or a reporting platform that they have, or a CRM system like a Salesforce, for example. So already there is a bit of a disconnect. Between how different teams are looking at data. All these data platforms that we just saw in the previous slide have different tracking methodologies, different ways they report on data, different metrics. And I think this is something that's very visible across the clients that we work with. Usually, a platform like Google Analytics doesn't necessarily always collect the main objective that a business is trying to do. So, it might be collecting leads data, but not sales data. And sales data is probably sitting in a separate CRM somewhere, like a Salesforce, as we saw previously. So all in all, when you're looking at all these platforms, different teams, everyone's using different systems, and the main objective isn't necessarily being communicated across everyone as it should be. So there's a pretty significant requirement to work towards a single source of truth, that everyone can look at. All the teams, everyone who's working on a business, different teams, different people, should be looking at something consistent across the board. There's a lot of benefit to doing that. First of all, from a marketing perspective, if we are looking at leads data right now, we're probably not optimizing or missing a trick to optimizing our campaigns towards sales. But if we join data sets and if we look at a single source of truth or something equivalent, we can start looking at our marketing campaigns and analyzing performance and optimizing performance towards sales, things that actually matter to a business. Personally speaking, this is something that happens quite a lot as well. We report on Google Analytics, for example. Client says, I've got 10 conversions, we report 20, and there's always a bit of a friction that happens because of the usage of these different platforms across the board. Once you start looking at the key objective that your business should be looking at across the board, you can improve your budget allocation because you know that you put in X amount of dollars and you got Y amount of sales, and with improved budget allocation, your performance should typically improve as well. And it also improves forecasting because forecasting usually relies on historical data. The better your historical data becomes, the better your forecasting becomes. So that's definitely a big positive. So how do we get to this single source of truth? And obviously everyone looks at the same data. So in theory, the methodology is relatively simple, but it's actually pretty difficult to implement most of the times. What we're trying to achieve here is, if we take an example of two platforms where you're using Google Analytics in an agency and Salesforce within the business, you need something called a key or a unique identifier to join the two data sets. So in its simplest terms, you could potentially use date. So obviously all these platforms would collect date. It's not recommended, but as an example, a simple example, you could join the two data sets on a key which could be a date, because it would sit across both platforms and you can use it to match the two data sets. Now, that's not something that we do, but as an example, that's something that can be done. So once you've identified that key, there are various ways to join the two data sets. We worked on a few projects internally. Our data team in Datum has worked on a few projects to create this single source of truth. And typically speaking, when identifying this key or this unique identifier, there's two different ways that we can approach this problem. No problem, but approach this scenario. So one way to look at this is using something called a platform-generated unique identifier. We spoke about Google Analytics. If you have Google Analytics implemented on your website, every time a user comes to your website, Google Analytics would assign something called a client ID to that user. That client ID is actually pretty easy to capture in various platforms, including Google Analytics, and then sending it back to something like Salesforce. And that client ID can be used as the unique identifier for your business for joining the two data sets. As soon as it becomes available in Google Analytics and in Salesforce, you have this key that you can use to join both the platforms. It's unique per user, per browser, so there might be some inaccuracies within the systems, how the data is matched, but it gives you a very good match rate actually. I guess one of the big downfalls of the system is obviously you're relying on a third-party platform for something that's very key to your business. So if Google tomorrow says that we're not going to use client IDs and we're going to use something else, then your implementation is going to be in trouble. The better and harder way is to probably use something that's generated by the website itself. As a website, it's possible to generate a user ID to a client, as Google Analytics does to a user. It's definitely harder to implement because you'll have to create an infrastructure where users are being assigned this user ID. It's also probably more suitable for websites that have some kind of a login system available or a customer portal of some kind, because if you think about it, when you're logging in or if you have a customer platform of some kind on your website, you're already assigning a customer number of some kind which can be captured and used as a unique identifier, but not necessarily for something that's a brochureware website or a lead gen website, for example. This unique identifier or this ID is going to be unique per user because we are assigning it, and it will be more accurate than the client ID, for example, generated by Google Analytics. And obviously it's your own solution, you've created the infrastructure for it, so you own this whole infrastructure, so it's obviously not relying on any third-party platforms. Besides all the benefits of using this single source of truth around budgeting, optimizing campaigns, there's a lot of benefit in just looking at the data. Once you have joined data, your marketing data and your business data, there's a lot of benefit in looking at this data, visualizing it, and then deriving any insights that might come out. You can look at obviously customer lifetime value. You can do without bringing in Google Analytics data as well, but once you bring in something like Google Analytics into the picture, you can start, looking at customer lifetime value by your marketing channel. So how is paid search performing by customer lifetime value, paid social, etc., etc. You can start adding different segments that are available in Google Analytics. The data in Google Analytics is very rich. You can have various segments that become available once you join the two data sets to look at your business data as well, like user type. So how are your returning users performing versus your new users to the website, for example. The same analysis can be done on repeat rate, on churn rate, how people are churning on the website. And if you have ROI metrics available, then you can do similar stuff using the ROI metrics as well. And that is me. Thank you very much.